Now, Genesis has just unveiled the GV80 coupe concept at the New York Auto Show. And this being an SUV coupe, usually I'm not a fan of them at all. But if we're gonna have to have those available because they are selling like crazy, I think Genesis just nailed the design of how to make a proper looking coupe, SUV coupe. And we're going to talk more about that when we jump into Photoshop and have a look at the front, side, rear, and also the interior. So they call this a concept, but this is definitely headed into production, and I'm really excited about that, not just for the design, but also for the powertrains. So let's have a look at this article from Car and Driver, and let's see what they have to say about the GV80 coupe concept here. So it's a four-seat version of the company's GV80 midsize SUV, and it's a sporty take of the SUV coupe fad with a carbon fiber roof and aggressive Ducktail rear spoiler. I love the Ducktail rear spoiler on this one, and I love the graphics that we have in Genesis overall across their entire lineup right now. And inside we have carbon fiber shelled bucket seats, each with a hand pump to inflate their bolster. So that's very, you got to do some manual labor in this GV80 coupe. So the wheels properly sitting, it sits on proper 23-inch size wheels, exactly what I want to see. Big wheels on, specifically if you're gonna have a sporty, big, larger volume like we have in a coupe SUV, you need to have larger wheels as well. And 23s just looks fantastic. 5-spoke simple design. And the orange magma exterior color is inspired by the volcanoes surrounding the South Korean peninsula, where, of course, Genesis is from. Although the company is on the path to an electric-only lineup, the GV80 concept gets an internal combustion powertrain. And I'm really happy about that, because this design just looks like a design that needs to make some noise when it's going down the road. And it's maybe it's gonna have the 409 horsepower twin turbo 3.5 liter V6 with electric superchargers from the G90 sedan. I think that would be the way to go, to have some electrification in there. I'm a fan of this, combining internal combustion engines with some sort of electricity to help with the power, specifically off the line, and also in between shifts. It makes for a smoother ride while still retaining the internal combustion. Or it can get the 375 horsepower twin turbo V6 currently in the GV80 lineup. And Luke Donkervolk, the design boss of Genesis, huge fan of his work across his entire career. He said that the company doesn't intend to create a sporty sub-brand for such a vehicle, but instead this will be basically just another Genesis, but with a very, very good looking design. So jumping into the design here and jumping into Photoshop, let's have a look at what's going on in this gorgeous coupe SUV. I never thought I would say those words, but here we have it, the Genesis concept. And the thing is, they say this is a concept, but look at everything that goes on in here. The only thing that I can see has to change for the production is potentially the headlights, because these looks like we only have daytime running lights in the design here, and we need to have some proper solid headlights in the front end to make it into production. But I know Genesis has done this before with their sedans. They have very thin strips of that kind of looks like daytime running lights, but they are in fact headlight units or bulbs inside this little strip of light, which is really cool. One detail that's interesting here is this section, the lower corner section. This reminds me a lot of what Mercedes is doing currently, specifically to their AMG models. This surfacing here with this curvature going down at the bottom and then having this plastic trim piece here with these fins, this is very much Mercedes, but it also suits the front end of the GV80 concept here, coupe. And we have these slots which add some more sportiness to this design. I love this color. Usually, orange cars, we used to have it orange dart back in the day, and I kind of like that color too. But normally I don't really like orange on cars, but in this case I think it looks really good. It feels like a deeper orange, almost red tone to this. We also looks like we have carbon fiber side mirrors, which I love. We also have a carbon fiber roof up here, but looking at the graphics, it's clearly a GV80 in the front end. And the thing is, what's interesting with this design is that it suits to be a SUV coupe, because usually what happens is companies take an SUV, a normal SUV, and then they just butcher the rear end. They just cut off a lot of volume in the rear, which makes the car look front heavy. I'm going to show you a good example of that a little later in the video. One detail I love that Genesis is doing is that when you see this logo in the front end, it feels like this logo is kind of sliding across the hood of the car, creating these wake of lines, almost like it's sliding in very calm water. And I love this integration of the front emblem in the hood and how it creates those wakes. Overall, I like this design. I like what Genesis is doing a lot, specifically with their concept cars. I want to see more of the concept car interpretations in production cars, and I think this is the right step to go. And we also have these big 23-inch wheels. So looking at the side view, and this is where usually it gets complicated with a coupe SUV. One key line that I think Genesis is doing fantastic is this line right here that kind of dips down and follows the body line and creates a movement when you look at this from a side view, even when the car is standing still. And this is a line that they have in pretty much the entire lineup right now. Another detail is, of course, the play with the two-line graphic that we have going across the entire car from the front end in one single line going into the rear taillights and creating these two lines that wrap around the entire car. It's like the fender kind of hides it a little bit with this metal, and then this same line comes back in this area and also, of course, comes back as the taillights in the rear. Very beautifully done. And I also think that looking at this, it almost looks like a Porsche Cayenne coupe, which is another car coupe SUV that I think looks really good, because Porsche, we're used to seeing Porsches with the graphics in the front and rear as a coupe, because it's the 911 is so ingrained in our minds that making it into an SUV kind of feels a little natural. And I think the same goes for this Genesis GV80 concept here. It just has a natural flow to it, and it doesn't look like cutting the rear end mass, taking away some mass or volume from the rear. It really doesn't make this feel front heavy like with pretty much every other coupe SUV. And another detail that definitely helps here with the volumes is that we have a massive, gorgeous ducktail in the rear that sticks up and brings back, kind of reclaims some of this volume that's been lost by having this sloping roofline in the rear. This kind of sends off this design and adds volume to the rear and balances out the weight distribution visually when you look at this from a side view. Really cool approach. And in addition to that, we also have a diffuser that eats into the body mass pretty far up here. And this also adds to the sportiness in the rear end and creates a very nice looking rear end with these graphics that we have in the rear. These two simple strips of light. You can see that the end points of the light follows the same line. If we continue the ducktail down into the wheel, this is the end point of the taillights in that exact line. Super nice done rear end, and the front too, and also the side view. I just love this design and what Genesis is doing overall these days. Then we have, I want to show you this. I want to just mention this graphic here because it also helps with reducing the overall height of the car and kind of have this contrasting trim piece to take away some mass from this height here, and we break it up in the bottom here, and then it comes back at the lower section with the body color. But it creates a much lower sitting car visually, even though it actually is an SUV and sits pretty high. So let's talk about the interior, and this is the main reason. This and the door handles here are the main reason why I can tell you that this is guaranteed to go into production as it is, almost without any changes at all, except for maybe some changes to the front headlights. But looking at this interior, it definitely looks production ready. It feels like they can just take this as it is right now and put it into production. I also love that we have a big, almost like, I don't know what this is, but it looks like a roll cage in the rear. Super interesting from Genesis to focus this hardcore on a sporty SUV. To me, I don't know, Genesis has always been this luxury sport brand, not entirely moving into the hardcore sport category, but this feels like it does just that. So I want to show you an example of how not to do a coupe SUV. And that is a Mercedes GLE. I think I've talked about this before, but this is such a good example of what not to do if you want to have a coupe SUV. Just look at the volumes of this coupe SUV up here. You take the SUV and you cut up, you take away this volume, which is a big part of the overall proportions of the car. I don't know if you can see it, but I can clearly see it here, just how front heavy this looks and how big this front end looks now that we have cut the rear end of the SUV. The balance is completely off here, and this is what happens when you're forcing a coupe SUV shape onto a proportions that wasn't designed for it initially. And you can see that the normal GLE is one of my favorite designs of a SUV right now. I think this is one of the best looking SUVs on the market, but when they do this treatment to it and turn it into a coupe SUV, all that I love about the GLE normal SUV is completely lost, and the proportions are completely shattered, and it just doesn't look good. It looks like it's a super front heavy car that will understeer in every single corner, and I think that's the challenge you have when you're creating coupe SUVs. However, Genesis seems to have gotten this exactly right with the GV80 concept. Now all we have to do is wait for the announcement that this is actually going into production.